This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. You know, looking back in time, there's some characters out there, if you are into literature, that kind of influence, I think, the way you think, particularly when you're a kid and you're learning about these literary giants. They influence you, I think, the way you look at the world. And I got to tell you, there's one character in particular that has always fascinated me. And there's been various iterations of this character throughout time, but probably this is the first. And his name was Faust. And Faust actually is known for having made a deal with the devil. Now, this comes through, they say at least, that he had a dissatisfaction with his life and he was unfulfilled. But as a result of this deal with the devil, he was able to become legendary in his knowledge of all things. And he could experience anything that he wanted to experience, almost on tap, if you will. Today, we've got an actual case of tragedy involving a young woman who was only 21 years old at the time of her death. And also a man named Faust. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Brother Dave, you know, I got to tell you, man, I think that most people, they hear me talk about forensics on the show, and they think that I am just by default a science guy and, you know, kind of a nerdy dude. And I guess I am. Actually, I embrace the term nerd because I always tell my son, who's 22 now, and he's in a very technical career that he's being educated in at university right now. I've always told him, I said, son, nerds rule the world. And so, and that's the truth. But I got to tell you, I've always been a science guy. Science was never necessarily my passion. And when I was in high school, my favorite subject in the world was actually English and literature. And that's the one AP class I actually did in high school back during those times. And my professor or teacher was a guy named Dr. James Cook. And Dr. Cook has passed on now, but to have a guy that had a doctorate in literature that was teaching high school was like really remarkable for that period of time. First off, nowadays you can swing a dead cat and hit somebody with a doctorate. They're everywhere. Back then, doctorates were rare, and to have access to that brain. And I mentioned Faust just a second ago, and Faust is one of those characters that we explored in high school. And, you know, there's translation between, I think, what we see and do in forensics and the classics. Because, as they say, there's nothing new under the sun. If evil has always been around. And I got to tell you, brother, the case of Tara Baker that we're talking about today, this is pure, unabashed evil. And this family has been suffering now, these many years, from a case that occurred back in 2001. They have been suffering all this time, but thank the sweet Lord above, it looks like they finally have some answers.
When we were talking about Laken Riley and that whole rigmarole, I'm saying that happened with that, not that the story was rigmarole, just when that was going on. And in the eyes of the country,
and there was so much
wrong.
around it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This story came up, Tara Baker, because at the time it was an unsolved.
I forgot about it. It did come up.
Mm-hmm.
It did come up.
And it was mentioned as, hey, this isn't the first time we've been there. Here's an unsolved crime from 2001.
Holy smokes! You just hit me with that. I'm just thinking right now the proximity, time wise, to the Laken Riley homicide, and then on literally on the heels of this, out of Athens, Georgia.
Yeah,
this case has been solved.
The reason it hit me was because you mentioned it, and one other person mentioned the Tara Baker story. And I'm going to be honest with you, I got it confused with Tara Grinstead, another unsolved case that has been solved in the last 2 years.
And a Georgia case. It's a Georgia case, well.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I looked up. I remember Tara Baker. Who are we talking about? And I went and looked it up, and I was like, "Oh my word!" It was one of those things. And then when I saw it bubbling up last week that we had a solution, the rumors hit first, and then yeah. So Tara was in Athens going to college. She was accepted at the University of Georgia Law School after she graduated from Georgia College with 2 bachelor's degrees.
2 bachelor's degrees, yes.
Many of us barely get out with one.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, her commitment to social justice was a big deal. A very inclusive individual, pulling everybody along, the whole rising tide thing. That was her. In a nutshell, Tara was the person that people looked up to, not because she was the loudest in the room, but because she was the person you could count on.
Tara's entered into this world at this point. She's young, just gorgeous, but she's had to find a place to live, and that's part of surviving college, because I think that there are a lot of brilliant people that have wound up housed in really bad areas or bad places, and they don't survive in those environments because it's not healthy. It's not a productive study area and that sort of thing. But she had apparently lighted on this apartment that she had, and it's kind of a single story structure, standalone thing. And she sets up housekeeping there, and Lord have mercy, the horror that kind of unfolded, Dave, in this particular case is something that we don't really see all the time on body bags, but certainly it has been revealed now with these changes in the case. It's been revealed what she probably went through, Dave. Can you kind of back up a little bit? I'm sorry I prattled on, but what actually went down relative to the discovery of Tara?
Tara was living by herself, and I want to make sure I get this right. She heads over to the law library. By the way, and this goes back to the college lifestyle. She had just after returning to classes for the spring semester, she heads to the law library for a study session with a friend. By 7:30, the friend is ready to go, but Baker not ready to stop. She keeps on studying. That was her nature. At 9:45, okay, her friend, her study partner, bails at 7:30. Tara's still there, 9:45, studying. She calls her friend from the library to make sure she got home safe, and mentions that she has plans. She's going to leave in a couple of minutes and be back at her place. He's living in an off-campus apartment. It's about a 15-minute drive from the campus library to her apartment. I said Baker was living alone. She had 2 roommates. It kind of hit me in the head. Wait a minute, she's got roommates. They had both left earlier that evening for a weekend trip out of town. Friday morning. All right, so we go Thursday night. She's at the law library with a friend, calls the friend to make sure the friend got home, tells the friend I'll be leaving around 10. Her roommates are gone for the weekend. We believe she made it home because of what happened. The next morning, 9:30, she misses a class. This is not something she does. Mid-morning hours, January 19th, the Athens Clark County firefighters are called to an apartment fire. Firefighters break down a locked door to access the unit. They find a fire has broken out in the bedroom. It has burned through the roof. Amongst the rubble, firefighters discover the body of a young woman who is later identified as Tara Baker. So the thumbnail. Thursday night, she meets a friend at the law library to study. The friend bails at 7:30. Tara stays there till 10. She talks to her friend at 9:45, says, I'll be leaving here at about 10 o'clock. That's the last time we know she had contact with anybody. We know she got to her apartment because she was found the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So a 12-hour window, basically, of the time we know she was planning to be home 10 p.m. till basically 10 o'clock the next morning. So a 12-hour window. And in that time period, Joe, something happened that caused her to miss her 9:30 a.m. class for firemen to be called because there's a fire. So whatever happened before 9:30 when she missed the class.
Yeah, and just so you understand, one of the big determinants here when we talk about fire cases is you want to understand causality, okay? Because there's any number of ways that fires can start, and to be able to examine that, you can have natural events, which some people will refer to as act of God, lightning strike, for instance, or maybe for instance, like our friends out in California experience and other locations out west with wildfires, which are, essentially acts of God. And you can't have an idiot that thumps a cigarette out of the window going down the road. And that has been known to start those types of things.
Johnny Cash did it in the 60s.
Yeah. And so sometimes, but that's the key, isn't it, Dave? When you walk in to a scene and there before you are the burned remains of a home and the charred body of a young, beautiful woman who is working harder than most people can even begin to appreciate. You want answers. And unfortunately, it took over 2 decades to arrive at some answers. Let's track back in time here a little bit, back to 2001. Just for particularly folks that might be a bit younger, Dave, this is all occurring before 9/11 happened. We're still months before that event ever occurred. It was, I have to say, it was a different world prior to 9/11. I probably can get you to agree to that more than likely. It changed everything. So, we had the internet, we had news on the internet, but when you were mentioning the earlier case from the young lady, Laken, do you remember? And I know you do because we were right in the swirl of it, the media saturation relative to that case, how we had data coming in all the time. There were articles and things and people making comments. We did a podcast about it. I appeared on Nancy's show. I appeared on national television shows about it. Right. Tara's case, for the time, received some recognition. I don't know how far and wide this spread, but I do know that at the moment in time, and I was still working in Georgia at the medical examiner's office, this case was all over the news in Atlanta because it was you never heard of anything happening like this. And they knew that they had a problem early on. They identified this case as a homicide. But, first off, one of the things you have to consider when you're examining a fire scene, you think about the time of year it is. That's the first thing that comes to mind for me. I have worked more fire deaths in the wintertime than I certainly ever have in the summertime. And it's because of heating issues, where you have individuals that have turned on a heater for the first time when the temperature drops and they don't know if it's still functioning. Dave, I actually had one guy that lived in a little shack years and years ago, and he had electricity but didn't have a space heater, and he had bed bugs, and he would kill the bed bugs with kerosene, and it's an old-fashioned remedy. He'd spray it on the bed. What? And it got so cold that he had 2 army blankets. He laid down with an army blanket over him, and he had another army blanket that he wrapped an iron in, and he plugged it in and slept with the iron. and it shorted and it killed him. And so you have events that occur like this. I've had people in temporary shelters. I had 6 homeless guys one time that were sleeping in a shelter right adjacent to the Carter Center in Atlanta in a plywood temporary housing thing that they had built for these folks. And one of the guys came in drunk and knocked over the kerosene heater, and the whole thing went up like kindling. So weather plays a role in this. So you don't want to be predisposed as an investigator to think, okay, what am I looking at here? Is this actually a case involving a short circuit? Is it a case involving, I don't know, was there a fireplace or was there some other alternative source of heat that maybe, my family, my granny in her old house, she would turn on her gas oven and leave the door open in order to heat the house, because she didn't have a lot of money.
You put boiling water on the stove, let that get hot and go. You let it run forever.
And it's kind of, forms a cloud, a warm cloud. And so when you go into these scenes, that's one of the things you're contemplating as an investigator. What's the origin? What's the source of a fire like this? And then, the specter of a potential homicide raises its head, and that completely spins your view around.
That's what I was just going to. This is the day before George W. Bush's inauguration. Yeah. Okay. Just when you think about the things that were going on, the day this happened, Bill Clinton was still president of the United States. Wow. He was in his last 24 hours of president. Yeah. And because when we were talking about this and you think about it, she was in town beginning the spring semester. Right. That had me thinking that it was springtime already. It wasn't. For the South, that time of January into the first 2 weeks of February, that's where we usually have a colder time than the rest of the year.
We do.
And when you have a fire and in the South, when you have cold, people do immediately think space heat or something along those lines. But it is an apartment. Things are a little different in an apartment complex or an apartment in general. So when they get to this fire in the morning, and I'm wondering, Joe, as they put out the fire, I mean, they're going to be, when firemen come into a place like that, they're scoping out damage and where the fire started and where to put it out. I mean, isn't that the goal here?
Well, yeah, actually, they're going to attack those areas. And I love the way firefighters address fire. They talk like they're in the Army. It's really how they, and they move out in teams like this, and they're going to attack a central area to knock it down.
But don't they treat it like a living thing? Because the fire is consuming oxygen that it actually has to be killed.
It does. And I think even De Niro said famously, and that's a line that they lifted from the fire service, mind you, in the movie Backdraft. There's a soliloquy by De Niro. He plays a arson investigator in that movie, and he talks about the fire is a living, breathing thing. I'd heard that for years prior to that, and it was a license that was taken by the writers for that thing. But it's true. It requires there's several things that have to happen. It's called an uninhibited chemical reaction, and so you have to have heat, a source of heat. Right. Then you have to have an initiator, which might be gasoline or some other fuel source, and then or accelerant force, and then you have to have what's it called? You have to have a fuel source, like it could be drywall, it could be carpeting, it could be wood of any kind that's placed over an area, and then you have to have an uninhibited supply of oxygen. And it's almost like a big cycle that goes around. That's how fire works. And suddenly, at some point in time, fire is going to play itself out. Sometimes it takes longer than other times. Yeah. And when people dump gas in areas, that's merely an accelerant. How many folks have ever taken gas? I would not, please do not do this, all right? But have taken gas, for instance, and thrown it into an already burning fire. What does it do? It explodes.
It's scary.
It is, and it flashes over. But guess what? After that initial flashover, it dies out really quickly. Now, you might be trying to initiate that wood or the fuel source that you have there to burn more effectively, but after that gas is essentially that major component of gas is gone, that has been burned away, the fire is now totally dependent upon the supply of oxygen and the source of fuel to continue to burn. Okay, the trick though in any kind of death investigation involving fire is going to be the surrounding areas, because you're going to want to know where the most damage is. And anything that was being worn by a victim. And because many times with arsonists that are trying to get rid of a body or evidence, they will just splash gas all over a body. And I think I've spoken of this before, but just kind of as a little primer, we retrieve those items of clothing and also things that are attached to the body, because sometimes elements get stuck to bodies, to put it politely. We'll collect those at autopsy, and then we keep them, and we submit those for examination at the crime lab for accelerants.
Wow.
And if we can find a specific accelerant, say if it's a gasoline, you can get it down to the brand, Dave. Because because gas is gas, contrary to what they tell you. You know what makes it different is, you ever see these?
What you had for dinner?
There you go, bump. But you ever see these commercials for gas where they say, well, it's got Techron in it, or whatever the heck that is. Yeah, and it's got these additives that come into it that they claim are going to keep your fuel lines clean. That's the designator that separates all gases from other gases, because those are unique to that corporation or that entity, and they're trademarked. Right. And so crime labs actually have a list of these things. So if they recover that molecular structure, then you can say, okay, well, I know that this person went to a particular gas station. How many of those types of gas stations selling that gas are located in proximity to this event? And you see, that's a big indicator here. So you have to be really careful, it seems, when you're working these cases with
Unbelievable.
bodies.
Unbelievable. It never occurred to me that would happen. But, in solving a crime, every piece of evidence comes into play. Where that accelerant came from, who bought that accelerant, and now with everything on surveillance cameras down right to when it was bought. But back to Tara for just a minute here. When the firemen approach the apartment, they find that the fire is burning through the roof in a bedroom. And I'm thinking in my mind, I'm envisioning that there's a fire on the bed that's been piled. We have Tara on the bed, right?
Right.
And the fire is going straight up. That has the fire spread throughout the entire apartment, or is it isolated to that room and that event of her body?
Yeah.
Was it there to destroy the body as first cause?
Yeah, her body either being on the bed or adjacent to the bed. And right you are about that, Dave, because you look for the area that has the most destruction. See, this isn't rocket science, okay? Right. Wherever you have the most destruction is where the heaviest concentration of heat is going to be, which is the byproduct of fire. And the hotter the area, the more destruction. And the reason it's going through the roof, what's the fire doing? It's seeking oxygen, okay? And it will do anything. I say it like it's an entity. But
again, it goes back to saying it's a living thing. I mean, it has to have oxygen.
Yeah, and the fire is seeking a fuel supply, that uninhibited flow of oxygen. And so that's why if you see a case, and I've worked many that are like this, where you have evidence of searing or smoke damage on the roof, that this thing is probably burned for a while, that it took a bit of time for the fire service to get there and knock this thing down. Mm-hmm. And so you're looking at this and you're thinking, well, if I'm seeing this externally, oh my Lord, it is going to be really, really damaged inside the residence. Dave Mack, I got to tell you, one of the most intriguing things that you mentioned about Tara's case was the length of time between when she was last seen and when the fire was discovered. Keep in mind, school's back in session. There's people on campus. There's people inhabiting. And you go to a place like Athens, those apartments are filled. And more than likely, they're filled with kids that are there for school. They're living off campus. Somebody's going to take notice. They're going to take notice, particularly that time of day when people are up and running. I mean, you remember what it's like, in college. That time of day is kind of like you got to take classes at that time of day. You're going to be heading out, and people are going to notice this. So you've got a fire burning this intensely, but yet it's suddenly noticed. That time gap to me is kind of intriguing as an investigator.
Well, that's why I was trying to get into that, because we there's certain things that we know about Tara's last 24 hour of life. I mean, and it is because she was in school, and because she was a creature of habit, and because here we are just starting back in the semester, and where is she? In the law library studying. They just took back in session, and she's already putting in the work. She meets a friend there who the friend bails at 7:30, and Tara's there for another 2.5 hours. That's who she was. And so knowing that, realizing she wasn't one to go out gambling about, she went home. And we have this time period, just say 10 o'clock at night, because that's when we know she left the library or was planning on leaving the library and heading home. So 10 p.m., we have no contact with her other than what I'm aware of. Now, if I'm wrong, please correct me. But 10 p.m., we know she's heading to her apartment. Now, because this was an unsolved crime for many, many years, was the suspect laying in wait? Had he been watching the apartment? There were 2 other roommates, but they were gone for the weekend.
Important point right there.
Yeah,
Important
because
point.
I'm wondering, was this somebody that knew them? Was this a friend of one of them that knew Tara was going to be alone for the weekend, that her roommates were gone?
I think, boy, that's a big reveal there when you think about that. Who would have foreknowledge of the fact that these two would be out of pocket for that period of time? This young woman would be isolated in this. And, first off, I was thinking, well, for those that have never seen it, I have. Just indulge me, and let me describe it to you. This law library at UGA is, how can I describe it? Cavernous. It's vast. There's all kinds of points of observation.
Are you suggesting somebody was watching her in the library? It's that big?
It is that big. And also the thing about it, the UGA campus is I guess some people use the term bucolic. It kind of rolls. There's a lot of old oak trees, dark spaces, hedges, all those sorts of things. And it's really well manicured. But if somebody's laying in wait out there in the dark, waiting for this young woman to leave, maybe they had targeted her before this time. They had an awareness of her. And she probably fit a type, because most predators do, in fact, have a type. Some of them are opportunists. They'll take the first victim they can, but sometimes they have a type of person that kind of slips onto their radar, where they have they look for the opportunity. But the fact that the roommates would have been gone is something that is going to give me an idea here that you have to be going through the backgrounds of the roommates very thoroughly, and they might even have an awareness of it. It might be a peripheral. Maybe they said something while they're sitting around drinking coffee. Well, me and she and I are both going out of town this weekend, and all you got, E.F. Hutton, they're kind of leaning in,
right,
and they kind of hear this, and what a horrible thing, to think about. But here's the problem, Dave. We've got this huge gap of time. This fire did not initiate overnight. This fire is burning in the morning. People are just taking notice of it. That leaves this time from when she was last seen at the law library until she's finally found by fire service in there the next morning. What happened during that time? What had she gone through?
Well,
what did she endure?
Here's my question, Joe. We know that firemen are there. They're called to put this fire out. And in an apartment, I'm going to guess here that normally the fireman would be called by the person that lives in the apartment saying, hey, I started a fire. I can't get it out. Help, In this case, they were called because somebody saw the fire coming through the roof of the apartment.
Right.
And I don't know that they expected to see a victim because, to be honest with you, she was supposed to be in class at 9:30 that morning. And this is after that.
Yeah. And so how, this is a bold thing. If you're going to be a fire setter, most fire setters do this sort of thing at night. And I was looking at the layout of where this event actually occurred, and the old address was 160 Fawn Drive in Athens, and it's a collection of kind of the road is kind of, I don't know, it's curvy that goes through here, but there's two outlets. There's not a cul-de-sac on this road. So it's almost, it's not truly a through road, but it is a connecting road that you can get out to other major arteries. So if an individual is walking away from it, just walking down the sidewalk casually, hoping that no one notices the fire, he might appear to be innocuous at that point in time. I don't know that anybody saw anybody sprinting away. Because I don't know about you, man, but when I'm around fire, if it's out of control, I want to get away from it as quickly as I possibly can.
You can't be in there close.
No, with all of my hair and skin intact, dude, and all of my clothing.
All right. Well, how do you know, Joe, when you've got a fire that requires firemen to show up, they put the fire out and find the body of a woman.
Yeah.
And I know that according to the, I guess the police are the ones that actually revealed that Baker was beaten, that she was stabbed, strangled, and potentially sexually assaulted. How in the world are we going to find out all this, Joe?
Oh my gosh, it is so difficult, Dave. So very difficult. So many changes occur to the body. And let me tell you, just from the scene, what would have happened. What do we know about the fire? What drew it to the attention of a passerby? What did you say just a moment ago?
They saw the fire going through the roof.
Yeah. And guess what happens? People don't think about this, but if you have a fire that is involving the roof, guess what happens to the ceilings in those rooms? They collapse. Right. So you've got the studs in the ceiling. You've got
I got to stop you. My thought, Joe, I'm not kidding. My thought was that you have the bedroom, you have the bed, you have Tara on the bed. And to be honest with you, in my mind, I was picturing stuff thrown on top of her that would act as some type of fuel for the fire, that the fire is lit and it goes straight up from the bed and Tara and burns a hole in the ceiling and burns a hole in the roof. That's what I was thinking. And that's not the case.
No, it causes, it compromises the strength structurally. And so, and it goes pretty quickly. And it will collapse, particularly when they start hitting it with water. This is the other thing that folks don't realize. Did you know that, like, when you take sheetrock, for instance, that's made out of gypsum, when you hit that with water, guess what it turns into inside of a fire scene? When you combine it with all of the other charring, it turns to mud. And so you're slogging through all of this, and there's like pieces of wood, other debris that have collapsed in. And in one sense, it protects the body, but in another sense, it erases evidence. And the fact that with Tara, they were able to identify sharp force injuries, blunt force injuries, which means she was struck probably multiple times. And I think the most glaring is that she was asphyxiated somehow, perhaps with ligature or hands. And you will see this externally. Even I've had cases where people have been stabbed and cut and have been burned. You can still see the incised injuries. Here's the problem, though. As the body heats up, it hardens and it cracks. People don't realize that the remains actually crack. The skin cracks because you've got skin overlying a layer of fat. And as that cooks off, it begins to split. And so being able to delineate between a sharp force injury and a fire-related artifact, which is what these are called, it's a fire-related artifact that presents on the body. It takes, these autopsies, Dave, take hours to do, because you're having to, it's almost like putting together a jigsaw puzzle in mud, because your vision is so compromised. That's why x-rays are really important. many times you'll x-ray fire bodies. You'll find nails. You'll find screws. Anything else that's around this area that may have fallen into the bag with the body when you're collecting them, because most of the time you don't x-ray the body outside of the bag. You put the plates under the bag and you x-ray the bodies while they're in there. So you have to account for all of this as you're going along. And also with fire deaths, you're thinking, well, were they shot? And if they were shot, are there going to be a little lead storm in there or maybe an intact projectile? So, my gosh, man, it takes hours to make your way through it. Then, on top of it, if that wasn't enough, fire fractures bone. The hotter the fire gets, particularly with the skull will begin to, first off, the brain boils. And it splits the skin outside, the fire does. The brain will boil almost, not totally, but the liquid portion, because the brain is not as firm as you might think it is in life. The brain will begin to expand inside the cranial vault, and the heat externally combined with the internal events going on will actually cause these kind of heat fractures in the skull. So you have to make your way through that. Is this related to, say, blunt force trauma? Or is this related to an artifact after the fire is passed? So you've got the calculus in this thing. Fire deaths are a lot harder to work, for instance, than even decomposed bodies, because the body is continuing to be traumatized after death, the human remains. So it's a tough thing. But here's I think my point. Whatever they assessed at the time of her autopsy, Dave, they were able to recognize these three types of trauma, which would be manifested internally. So if you've got a choking event or strangulation event, you'll see hemorrhage in the soft tissues of the neck. Stab wounds, you will have a track that is making its way through certain organ systems. You can pick up on that. The bludgeoning might be a bit more difficult. If it's a beating type of event, you might can find areas of hemorrhage, but you really have to walk a fine line there where you're trying to assess what happened ante-mortem and post-mortem. But here's the real thing here. This is where the truth comes out. Dave, they've used the term sodomy here. They're saying that she was sodomized. Now, that means many different things to different people, but she was sexually assaulted. So if she was sexually assaulted, knowing what we know now, they were able to glean some type of biological sample from her. I think probably through a rape kit, possibly, and they've been holding on to this all these years, trying to explore. And it would not surprise me in the least bit if potentially familial, forensic, genetic, DNA, genealogy was not involved in this, because it's taken all of this time. They have some kind of biological sample because, Dave, it appears that DNA has unlocked the answers in this case.
The part about this that, again, we talked about it earlier, the death of Laken Riley, that opened up the exercise of unsolved crimes in this area of the state. And this was one that was mentioned. Joe, it had been an unsolved crime for so long. And we have had, in the last 10 years, DNA becoming front and center on unsolved cold cases. At what point do the investigators decide it's time to run this through the database? Or is there another way? I mean, I know you have CODIS and we're developing a DNA thing like CODIS, but at what point do they send this off and say, here's what we got, see if you can find a match? What are we going to do? Genetic genealogy? Are we going to 23andMe? How do they go about doing that?
Well, they're going to exhaust every potential possibility they have. CODIS is going to be the first stop along the continuum here to see if you can get a viable sample at that particular time. Does it go back to any individual that is already pre-existing in the CODIS database. And there's two sections to CODIS. You have those individuals that are known, that are part of the data bank, that have committed some kind of crime that would compel the state to take a sample from them and enter them into that database. Then you have the unknown, or it has in the past been referred to as the forensic database. And that is DNA samples from locations where you do not have a perpetrator. They're unknown cases, and they can get a hit off those. So if you've got like, say, 2 cases in Mississippi and Alabama, and maybe you've got another one in Tennessee, and all of a sudden you have a 4th one that occurs in Georgia, that's going to give you an indication that the donor of that sample is migrating about. You just don't know who they are at this point in time. This case is so over the top, Dave. It's really hard to believe that this individual would not have acted out sexually before, because this is a very violent event where I think, actually, for my 2 cents, I think that he probably held her in that residence for some time. Remember, they're all alone. And what were we looking at? It's like 12 hours. 12 hours before the fire is ever seen. So was this an all-night event that went on where this individual perhaps tortured her throughout the night, where he beat her repeatedly, choked her repeatedly without killing her, or stabbed her, or inflicted incised wounds, which are slices over a period of time?
What we know is that during that 12 hours, Joe, a wonderful, beautiful, smart, loving person was taken from planet Earth. And we now have, after 23 years, we've had somebody in custody. The police have arrested Edrick LaMont Faust. You mentioned this early on, how that name would come into play. He was 25 at the time of this murder. He's now 48. He has been charged with felony murder, 2 counts, malice murder, aggravated assault, possession of a knife during the commission of a crime, aggravated sodomy, concealing the death of another person, tampering with evidence, and first-degree arson. Joe, based on these charges, police learned a lot, because they've got possession of a knife during the commission of a crime. Doesn't that mean that he brought it to the apartment?
Yeah, I think that it probably does. And what we don't know, because the investigation, from the perspective of, and hear me right, from the perspective of the fact that they have finally effected an arrest, this investigation is kind of beginning anew, now, because you have a target now. What we don't know is, was the knife a leave behind, or did they find it on his person when he was arrested, which, wow, that many years after the fact, I would list more toward having left behind. And those injuries would have been assessed, the sharp force injuries would have been assessed based upon the physical evidence that particular type of knife or knife style would have left behind. And they have a lot to work with here. And, keep in mind, Faust has only been charged. He has not been convicted. He'll have his day in court. But something interesting came up as a result of Tara's homicide. The Georgia State Assembly, the General Assembly, actually passed a law called the Coleman-Baker Act. And the other victim that's named in this case, or in this law, is a lady named Rhonda Sue Coleman, and she was murdered in Hazelhurst, Georgia, back in 1990. And what this act actually does, Dave, is it provides families with access to the files in these cold cases, so that they can work alongside the police, that they can go back and see where the police are. And this thing was just filed in 2023. It was just, written into law at that particular time, because, families are so frustrated. I can't even even though I've worked these cases over the years, these cold cases, I cannot even begin to put myself in the position of families and the grief, the constant grief that they're faced with. But this one little shining light is beaming through. And unfortunately, it's in the wake of the snuffing out of another shining light. Tara Baker died when she was only 21 years old, just off campus of the University of Georgia. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.